So much for having me. So my name is Noa. I am 27. I originally come from a very small village in the south of Israel by the Gaza Envelope called Shachar. Now I currently live in Tel Aviv, and I'm going to be sharing a little bit about my story from October 7th and moving forward to this day. So I grew up, like I said, in a very, very small village. We're basically second line of the Gaza Strip. So all the kibbutzes you've heard of, Nachal Oz, Kfar Aza, Be'eri, we are right behind them. And I grew up there almost my entire life. In my opinion, it is the most beautiful area in Israel. And as funny as it sounds, it's also, in my opinion, the most peaceful area that I've ever been to. And I had a great childhood growing up there, and I loved growing up there. When I was 10 years old, my family and we moved to Stockholm, Sweden for 5 years because my dad is a diplomat. And that's when I first in life encountered and was exposed to other forms of cultures and Jewish identities and what the Jews in the diaspora even look like and what their culture is like and what their religion practices are like. And for me, it was the very first time I was opened up to this world, to Jews of the diaspora, and learned that there are more Jews out there at just 10 years old. And I remember how the thing I was really looking for, being far away from home, from my friends, from my family, was the sense of community. And I found that with my Jewish people. I always wanted to go back, going to an international school. I was always looking for my other Jewish peers and my Israeli peers, anybody who I could find in Stockholm who was Jewish, because I had that sense and that feeling that was missing. And so I found that Jewish peoplehood in the Chabad community, in the community of the Israelis and Jewish people in the embassy, and in other Jewish organizations in Stockholm. Then I returned back to Israel. I graduated college, high school and college here. I actually went to high school also back in the Moshav by the Gaza Envelope, so at the same place. And that's where I met Ziv and Gali Berman, 28-year-old twins now from Kibbutz Kfar Aza, who were taken hostage on October 7th. And thankfully, Baruch Hashem, have returned safely to us by now, which is always, I find, is so insane to be telling this story now that I know the ending and now that we know there's a happy ending to this. But in the past 2 years, sharing the story, not knowing how it was going to end and not knowing whether they were going to come back home safely was a completely different story. And so I met Ziv and Gali Berman there. And as I say, the rest is history. It's been 8 years since, and Ziv became my best friend and the closest person to me in this world, and the only person who knows everything about me, all my past, all my secrets. I always call him my right arm because I feel like he's such a part of me. And I feel like they're both my family. And on October 7th, my family was home in the Moshav. Ziv and Gali were in Kfar Aza. I actually wasn't in Israel on October 7th. I was in California on a delegation of American Jews and Israelis. And for me, it was a Friday evening. And I learned about what was happening in Israel, just like everybody else, through social media and through just friends and my family texting me and sharing in the group chats what was going on and what they were going through. And I have to say that being far away was possibly the hardest thing that I ever had to go through. And the most tremendous amount of guilt is feeling like I'm not there, like not being in Israel on October 7th and not going through everything that my family and friends went through. And I always say I would have much rather be in Israel on that day rather than to be away and safe. And at that time on October 7th was also the time that I spoke to Ziv, and he's the one who told me at only 7:30 in the morning that he hears Arabic outside his apartment. And we talked for 2 hours until I got the last message from him. And then his phone shut off. And at that moment, I understood that I have to return back home. I have to get home to Israel. I have to go back to my people, which I ended up doing as fast as I could. And I got back to Israel on Monday morning, which for me seemed like eternity. All this time, I have no contact with Ziv and Gali. I have no contact with so many other friends of mine. I know about people who are missing, people who are potentially, allegedly, maybe kidnapped. Some that we already know are not alive anymore. And when I get to Israel, I start looking for them. And after 11 days, I find out that Ziv and Gali are kidnapped. And ever since that moment, my life has changed. And I always say there's the Noah before October 7th and there's the Noah after. And then I'm no longer the same person. And I think none of us are. And before October 7th, I was a college student and I worked for Masa, bringing Jews from the diaspora to Israel. And I loved what I was doing and I was very happy and fulfilling my life and dreams and goals in life. And on October 7th, just it felt like someone clicked the pause button and everything completely stopped. Because it's not only the lives of people who were kidnapped and their families and the lives of the people who were murdered that have completely stopped, but also of their surroundings. There are so many circles affected by the situation. There's not one person, I think, in Israel who was not affected by the situation. Everybody remembers where they were on October 7th. Everybody has some kind of relative or a friend or a neighbor or someone who went to school with them or to work with them. Everyone knows someone. And those circles were all affected, every single person, every single circle. And I was considered one of the closer circles. And I just understood very quickly at that moment that my life from this moment is changing. And I stopped everything I was doing. And I realized that now my only purpose and the only thing I can do is to fight for them. I went to reserve duty in the army, which I went for 100 days. And my job in the army, it has to do with everything ballistic. So I knew I was going to go immediately to reserves. I do so almost every single time there's some sort of operation or a pre-war kind of thing. And I went there knowing that that's one way I can help. And I always say, for me, going to reserves and helping my country, helping the army is one of the best things that I can do. Secondly, I decided that the only thing I can do is be a voice to them, is try and do whatever I can. Since I can't go into Gaza and get my friends out of there, I said, I'm not going to sit at home and just wait in the shelter and wait for something to happen, but I'm going to do the next active thing that I can. And I would say that before October 7th, I was a rather shy person. Never in my life did I think I'd be speaking in front of people or crowds, or doing interviews or podcasts. Never in my life. But I think that when you want something and you have passion for something so strongly, none of it matters. Like the shyness doesn't matter, the embarrassment doesn't matter, the vulnerability doesn't matter when you want something so bad. And I had such a clear goal in front of my eyes, and that was to get my friends back home. And so I went to Hostage Square and I joined the Families Forum, the nonprofit for the kidnapped and the missing. And I started just talking. I started talking to groups of Israelis, non-Israelis, Jews, non-Jews, younger people, older people, any group of people who was willing to come and listen and hear about who Ziv and Gali are and what their story is and what people can do. And I think my one big focus was I understood at that moment that if it's not us, their family and friends who are going to fight for them, nobody else is going to do it for us. And so it's on us. And I also realized that if just there's so much that people want to do, but they don't know what to do. The number one question I kept on getting asked is, what can we do for the hostages? This is clearly a frustrating situation for all of us, for all Jews, for even people who weren't Jews who reached out and offered a lot of support. But people didn't know what they can physically do. Both people who are in Israel and especially people who lived outside of Israel. And at the beginning, I remember also not knowing how to answer this question and what to tell them, because the one thing is, okay, we want them back home, and I can't tell you to go into Gaza and get them out of there. Even I can't do that. I can't tell you to join the army. These are not things that are practical. But I found that in raising awareness and in advocacy, and also in being proud of your sense of Jewish peoplehood and whatever Judaism means to you, and getting together with your Jewish peers and talking about what's happening. Those things meant a lot. And there were so many ways to help the families, each person in their own way. And that you don't need to be an advocate or an influencer to thousands of people, but even your close circles is already something. And even finding a certain connection is already something. And so there were a lot of things that people I thought could do about this. And I started sharing this with people. I started sharing my insights of what I thought people can do and what I also saw was working when people did. What I also saw that the families needed, also coming from a person who is very close to their family and very close to other hostage families. And I spoke at Hostage Square sometimes 7 days a week, sometimes 6 times a day to groups. So back to back, going to another group and another group and another group, doing interviews and radio and podcasts and trying to just get their voices out there and get their names out there, because all we wanted is for them to be heard. All we wanted is for people to not forget them. And I think that even now that this has ended, the reason why I'm still doing advocacy is because we also don't want people to forget that this happened. It's they're home and they're okay and they're safe, but we also can't let the world forget what happened to us. And by the way, what is still happening to us, since this isn't really over just yet. And at a certain point, people told me, what you're doing is great. And I got so many groups asking to hear my story and asking to hear Ziv Gali's story, that they said, we need this out there. We need to fly you out to America because people there need to hear you. And I flew to the States 4 times. And each time I went for around a month around college campuses and universities and Jewish federations and congregations and synagogues and any organizations that was willing to hear me, that was willing to accept me. Because like I said, all we wanted is for their story to be heard. That's all we wanted. All I wanted personally was to fight for my country in whatever way that I could. And I didn't know that before, but apparently I had a voice and I found my voice, and I found that what I say does matter to people, and that there is a form of influence just by speaking, just by sharing a very authentic, true, eye-level story. I also found that I had a really big strength in going to colleges and universities and speaking to young people like myself. The fact that I wasn't a bald guy in a suit, but I was me, I was Noah, I was someone who they could relate to, I was someone who they could think about their best friend, this happening to them, was also my strength. I think that my strength was in how authentic I was, because I wasn't sharing a story, I wasn't trying to sell something, I was sharing a reality. I was getting into people's faces and telling them, look into my eyes and see my pain. And that's something that none of you can argue with and none of you can deny. And I think that was really eye-opening for a lot of people. And so after going 4 times to the States and going around so many people and younger and college students and Jewish federations, and I received so much support from the Jewish community specifically, but also from other communities, from the Christian community, for example, who are also big supporters. And I also found that other people, even the ones who maybe don't know that much, a lot of people are willing to hear and learn. They just don't know too much, or they haven't been exposed to, or they haven't had the right person to meet in that encounter to come and talk to them about it. I've also, of course, had some not the most pleasant incidents with people hearing there is an Israeli coming to speak at a college campus. That's not always something that is, people always really are fond of. So on October 7th, the 1-year memorial, I spoke in the University of Michigan in front of 1,000 students, and I had a counter protest, which is something I was expecting and I knew was coming. And I have to say that it's those things I've seen on the news a lot. And then finally seeing it in person, I have to say, didn't strike me as hard as I thought it would, because I feel like I know that, it was this counter protest of 90 people. We were 1,000 people. There were 1,000 who were there, who came for the vigil, who came to hear me. And so those 90 people who may seem very loud and violent,